Please move.
Our embassy didn't tell us anything, so I think it is safe.
When we came here, we were a little bit afraid, but in Delhi they told us there was no problem.
Kashmir is currently the most militarised area in the world.
Fire!
Of the 4 Indo-Pakistani conflicts, 3 of them have been directly related to Kashmir.
The role they play is to saturate the targets on type of Tiger Hills by dumping a very large amount of explosives onto the targets in a very short duration of time.
Recently, just last year, there was the Pahalgam terrorist attack, which resulted in the deaths of many Indian tourists.
At least 5 people have been killed and 8 others injured after gunmen opened fire at a popular tourist spot in Indian-controlled Kashmir.
The UK Foreign Office advised against all travel to the Union territory of Jammu and Kashmir, including Pahalgam, Gulmarg, Sonamarg, the city of Srinagar and the Jammu-Srinagar National Highway. There have been frequent terrorist incidents in Jammu and Kashmir. There is a continuing threat towards Indian government targets and civilians, including tourists and foreign nationals. There is a heavy security presence in the Kashmir Valley. This, combined with violent protests and operations by security forces, has resulted in a number of deaths and serious casualties.
Violence is rising between police and protesters in Indian-controlled Kashmir. Rights groups describe the situation as a state of emergency.
There is a risk of unpredictable violence, including bombings, grenade attacks, shootings and kidnapping. The long-standing policy of the UK government is not to make substantive concessions to hostage takers. So there's a lot of historical context to this. Before 1846, Kashmir itself was ruled by outsiders, it was ruled by Mughals, Sikhs and Afghans, not Kashmiris themselves. So before the British left in 1947, Kashmir was what was called a princely state. So these princely states were not directly ruled by Britain. They had their own rulers, their own local rulers, but ultimately Britain called the shots. So Kashmir was ruled by a Hindu dynasty in a Muslim majority state. So Kashmir was essentially a colonial buffer state run by a proxy king, which would still serve British interests. So in 1846, when the Sikh Empire lost the war to the British gained control of Kashmir. And straight away they sold it to Gulab Singh, a Dogra Hindu leader. Now this led to Kashmir being ruled from 1846 until independence in 1947 as a feudal monarchy. The Muslim majority of Kashmir at the time were landless, heavily taxed and poor as a result. They faced religious discrimination. They also faced forced labour and no political rights. They could not own large amounts of land, they could not join the army or hold high-level political positions. And Kashmir, because of geography and its location, it was mountainous, it was remote, and as a result it was very difficult to control. So this is another reason Britain preferred to let it essentially rule itself internally, because they didn't have to deal with many of these issues and challenges. Upon independence, the state was volatile and unpredictable. You had the Muslim population largely favoured independence or becoming part of Pakistan. You had the current Hindu establishment, they wanted independence essentially, and then India obviously wanted influence in the area as well. So the first Indo-Pakistani War was in 1947, straight after independence, and this involved tribal fighters from the northwest entering Kashmir backed by Pakistan. Pakistan denied involvement, however did send their own troops once India sent their own troops to combat these fighters. This resulted in a ceasefire brokered by the UN in 1949. This resulted in Kashmir being split along what is now known as the line of control, with one side being administered by India and the other side being administered by Pakistan. Even though it was agreed there be a vote, India and Pakistan cannot agree on the conditions of such a referendum or such a vote, and therefore it was never held, leaving the territory still disputed until this day. Straight on a flight to Srinagar. It's my first time in Air India, which I have to say, people have warned me about Air India, but yeah, the plane wasn't very clean, it wasn't very nice, to say the least. But first time flying over the Himalayas, which was beautiful, it was amazing. And landed in Srinagar, I'd done my research, but still didn't really know what to expect. So I got into the airport, straight away greeted by a sign that says, "Welcome to Paradise on Earth," which is quite surreal because it's obviously such a beautiful part of the world, but it's been blighted by insurgencies and conflict for pretty much the last 100 years. So it's quite surreal to see "Welcome to Paradise on Earth" in such a troubled part of the world. But when you arrive, you have to fill in a form. So one of the airport staff had me fill out the form, and he's going through it with me. And he's like, "Purpose of visit?" I say, "Tourist." And he's like, "Terrorist?" Like, I'm like, "Oh shit." Then he's like, "Nah, I'm only joking." So that was quite an interesting welcome. At least a bit of humour, I suppose. But went out, and similar to any airport, you go to India or Pakistan or Bangladesh, straight away there's some guy running towards you asking, "Do you want a taxi?" In that part of the world long enough to know that usually that means be overpriced. But the big difference was, and I didn't really get to record this, I'll add images that I've gotten online, but there's just soldiers and police heavily armed everywhere. You will get armed police in metro station Indian airports, but literally it's everywhere, like a whole army there. And I'll go through later when I got dropped back to the airport how difficult it was to get into the airport because of the security restrictions. But a big issue was I was using my Revolut card, which worked fine in Indian banks, but I went to the bank in Jammu and Kashmir and my card wouldn't work whatsoever. So I'm kind of panicking because you need cash for the taxis. In airports in India and in Kashmir, you usually pay for a taxi up front, and that's how you know you're getting an alright price, because you go up to the taxi booth, you pay in advance, and then they find a driver who drives you to where you requested to go. However, that's all cash. I had very little cash, which thinking back was quite a dumb thing to do. My logic was, I said, I'll carry as little cash as possible, and then if I need it, I'll get it as I go along. So this means if I was to lose my wallet or God forbid get robbed, then I wouldn't be out with that much money. So I had an issue now, I couldn't get a taxi. Really need to use the bathroom. I talked before about the Indian toilets and how they did not use toilet paper. Usually they would have a hose to clean your backside, but the traditional way is you use a jug of water and your hand. So that's as far as I know why traditionally if you were caught stealing they cut off your hand, because they knew to use the same hand to eat as to clean yourself, so to say. So I went to the toilet there and this was the only option. There was only the jug, there was no like shower hose, no toilet paper, so that's all I'll say about that. There was an Indian bank there where my card would work, but their ATM was out of order, so no cash left. So I didn't know what to do. I'm starting to kind of panic, and in the middle of it there's this guy and he's trying to help me. The next thing his phone rings and it's like the Andrew Tate song, the French song. And I'm there stressed out of my mind. I just couldn't stop laughing. In the middle of Kashmir, this guy's ringtone is the Andrew Tate song. I was like, that's a bit random. Anyway, they did actually a cash in transit delivery or witness at the Indian ATM, but it was so casual. Literally these blokes showed up, heavily armed, in like a van, and they literally take out these like rucksacks with just like bales and bales of cash in them and refill the ATM. Now, as I said, they were heavily armed, they didn't have uniforms or anything. I was like it does kind of feel like almost like the last frontier. I suppose it is the last frontier to China. It's kind of a frontier culture, I got that anyway. But they refilled the ATM, and then lucky enough I could use the Indian bank where my card worked and get some cash out. So got a taxi to my accommodation, which was on a houseboat. So Kashmir is well known for its houseboats on Lake Dal, or Dal Lake. And that was a huge source of tourism in the region until the insurgency in 1989. And I have to say, it is absolutely beautiful. I've never seen anything like it, and it is unfortunate due to obviously the conflict that not as many people get to see it as would do if it wasn't a conflict zone. I think it would certainly, in that part of the world, would be one of the biggest tourist attractions. I saw a daycare centre on the road from the airport into the city with a very questionable name. But anyway, yet again on the road into the city, heavily armed checkpoints, I'd say every few kilometres in the city, probably even closer together, army checkpoints, usually got waved through. It turned out it was what I thought was the army, was actually the police. It was an internal militia, can't remember the name, I think something with C, I'll put it up on the screen, but they seem to be mostly around patrolling. So got to my accommodation, there's a load of fellas there, so I had to get out by boat to my accommodation because it was a houseboat in the middle of the lake. There's a lot of lads standing there and they're like, yeah, do you want a lift? So this guy brought me in. He's a young guy, so he's younger than me, early 20s I think he told me. And he said, look, I can take you a tour around the lakes later. I'll come back in half an hour for whatever price. And it was a very fair price. I think it was like the equivalent of 1,000 rupees, £10 or something. So checked into my accommodation, which was amazing. And it literally, my accommodation for one night, I got it on Hostel World, cost 1,000 rupees, so £10 as well, for this lovely houseboat. Houseboat itself was cold. It was quite cold at the time I was in Kashmir, but the sheets inside the room were heated, so it was actually lovely and cozy once we actually went to bed. What's even crazy with the houseboats that when I was there, their biggest year in a long time for tourism, and still everywhere was completely empty. I know it was off peak season, it's heading into winter, but like most of the houseboats were completely empty. £10 per night for something that I think in like a Western country would be marked as like a luxury houseboat, and probably like 500 a night or something ridiculous. Interestingly, I was talking to the owner of the houseboat. He's a very nice guy. I don't think I've the right to give an opinion on the whole Kashmir situation, and everyone I talked to seemed to say they wanted an independent Kashmir. They didn't want intervention from either state. Now, I don't know if that's the majority view, that's just my experience. He said he'd make me dinner later for a small price, I think it's like 400, 500 rupees, £4 or £5, lovely Kashmiri traditional curry, was delicious. And he also organised for me to go up to Sonamarg, so he gave me a number of options. So Sonamarg, Pahalgam, which Pahalgam is actually where the terror attack was quite recently last year. I chose to go to Sonamarg because I only had one day and it wasn't too far. I think Pahalgam was further, so I'd be able to go up to the mountains, get an experience of the Kashmiri mountains, and then be able to fly back to Delhi that evening. I went on the boat tour, which was very interesting. It's absolutely amazing because it's so peaceful, and it was raining, so you could hear the rain on the lake. You could hear the Islamic call to prayer, people going about their business.
If you like this, if you are not like this too, so.
Not a single Western tourist site, completely quiet. And as I said, absolutely beautiful. I had some chai while I was doing this, so nice, peaceful, quite good. And talking to the guy who was saying before the insurgency, he said well before he was born obviously, but the place would have been buzzing everywhere. It's just closed down shops, closed down businesses. Said it's quite tough living there. That's why a lot of people leave. Said that his girlfriend had cancer. It was very hard for her to find treatment to deal with that. So very interesting place, very interesting guy to talk to. We went past some abandoned Hindu temples.
Yeah, Bashus Karamis, the music, I think
Because once the insurgency started in 1989, most of the Kashmiri Pandits and Kashmiri Hindus fled because they feared Islamic terrorism and being driven out of the place. It's debatable whether they fled or were driven out, but I'm not going to try to not get into that. But the population of Srinagar itself was over 20% Hindu prior to the conflict, and now it's less than 2%. In modern terms, a lot of issues began in 1989 with the Kashmiri insurgency. This originated in the 1987 elections, where a Muslim alliance ran for office, a Muslim political alliance. This vote was largely seen as rigged by India for many people. This resulted in a lot of people saw that they could no longer rely on peaceful politics and needed to take up arms, which resulted in an insurgency from 1989 onwards. So originally the insurgency was led by many local Kashmiri militant groups. These were eventually backed by Pakistan in arms and resources, with the targets mostly being Indian government troops, the Kashmiri police. So the Kashmiri Pandits, which are Kashmiri Hindus, by 1990 over 100,000 had fled the valley. Nehru, the founding father of India and leader of the Nehru-Gandhi political dynasty, with his daughter Indira later becoming Prime Minister, and her son Rajiv also becoming Prime Minister of India. They were originally Kashmiri Pandit Hindus who moved to India. Now the Kashmiri Pandit exodus the reasons for it are quite contested, even though there was so many different groups leading the Kashmiri insurgency. The leadership was officially secular. There was a growing influence from Islamist groups. Kashmiri Pandits believed that Kashmiri culture was tied to Indian culture, whereas many Muslim Kashmiris believed that Kashmir was its own separate entity, not tied to Indian culture. Many Pandits felt that Kashmiri independence was a threat to Indian national identity. They also felt under threat from Pakistan and other Kashmiri militant groups in the region. Many left in 1990 to never return. I saw this myself with abandoned Hindu temples that were visible in Srinagar. A promise of India's currently ruling BJP party is that Kashmiri Pandits will be able to return to their homeland. Hence, we have seen in the past few years, Kashmir has been introduced as a region of India as opposed to its own entity with special status. That has resulted in the massive militarization of Indian troops in the region to keep people safe, or certainly give the impression that it is currently safe. They'd say that Hindu temples were evacuated or destroyed. They'd also say that they were essentially, the Hindus were forced to leave. We're told they have to convert to Islam or leave. Now obviously that's the two different perspectives. I wouldn't know or wouldn't say I'm in a position to comment, because obviously this happened over 30 years ago. China is also involved in the conflict. The main reason China cares about Kashmir is for security. Yet again, Kashmir is significantly located between Pakistan, India and China. Even in the past few years, China and India have had border skirmishes, often almost medieval-like.
Rare video of a border clash between Indian and Chinese troops has gone viral on social media. The video came to light after a clash occurred on December 9th in northeastern India's Arunachal Pradesh state near the border with Tibet. India said several.
So, a lot of abandoned Hindu temples around. Interestingly, yet again, I needed more money to pay this guy. So he brought me to an ATM, which happened to also be Bank of Jammu and Kashmir, so my card wouldn't work, but he brought me to another Indian bank and we were able to get sorted. Another surreal experience was when I was in the queue for the ATM. These 6 blokes, heavily armed, faces covered, with just wearing like bulletproof vests, come around the corner. And to be honest, they look like paramilitaries. So I didn't know them because I know obviously in the north of Ireland during the Troubles there's certain areas run by paramilitaries. So I didn't know. I was like, are we in an area run by paramilitaries? Are they like, is that like the local paramilitary or something? And I found out later that was actually the police. So the police there, like a lot of them, as I said, I wouldn't think they're police because they have their faces covered and they don't seem to have a particularly standardised uniform. Some of the police do, but a lot of them kind of just in fatigues and bulletproof vests. I never really felt particularly unsafe there. Everyone around is heavily armed because the Indian government have kind of wanted to normalise the state into India and revoke the special status. They do not want any issues, any incidents. When I visited, the only recent terror attacks have been against the police or the armed forces. So that was probably the only time I felt unsafe because one of the policemen was behind me in the line. And I was like, if someone was to attack them, I could be caught in the crossfire, but otherwise I didn't particularly feel unsafe. I'm in the line, just with his gun like held down to the ground, texting on his phone. Just like, this is so strange. You know, I know like in other countries, in Western countries, you'll have armed police around, stuff like that, but it's literally everyone there, like all the police there, heavily armed, and it's kind of like they wouldn't leave their weapons whatsoever, so even when he's in the bank, he's standing there in the queue with his like rifle down by his side. There's also, if you think of the Western tourists there, I remember I'd first seen the houseboats on Michael Palin documentary when I was a kid. And the houseboat he stayed in, a lot of famous people stayed in the 1960s. There was a lot of people on the wall. And probably most famously George Harrison of the Beatles. He used to go to Kashmir to find peace, get away from the hustle and bustle of Delhi and other cities. So he found it easier to write music there, and some of the Beatles songs were quite literally written on Dal Lake. The only George Harrison song on Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band album was Without You, and that was heavily inspired by Hindu spiritual concepts and was written about his time spent on the Dal Lake in a houseboat in 1966. What I couldn't believe about Srinagar is how clean it was and how fresh the air was, which compared to Delhi or Varanasi was the breath of fresh air, quite literally. Very clean air, you know, no rubbish anywhere. Bit of a contradiction, but besides the armed conflict, it's very peaceful. The lake itself is very beautiful and very peaceful. But it's like, that's the whole thing. It's almost like a contradiction. So when you're going through the lake, there's all these like businesses on the lake, like that you can only get to by boat. You'd have a shop that's on the lake, you can only get to by boat. And in the middle of it, there's just like Indian Army outposts with machine gun nests, which 2 blokes with a machine gun, ready if anything were to happen on the lake itself. There's also Kashmiri rugs are quite famous. I went to the boat shop where they actually make the boats, which are very unique to the Dal Lake, unique to Kashmir. Traditionally used for fishing, transportation, selling goods on the lake, and now maybe used for tourism. But they're still making them in a traditional way, which I saw, which was pretty cool. And then I also went to where they make the rugs. And to be honest, the guy who was trying to get me to buy one, he was saying, oh, they can be ordered all over the world. So you order them there and they send it all over the world. I was quite suspicious. It seemed very legit, seemed it was just for tourists. I don't know, maybe it was, but either way, I'm not in the business of buying a rug anyway, so it was a no for me. Got back, had a chill night in the accommodation.
And you come and your friends not come here. You going happy? Then all peoples come here.
Yeah, definitely.
All places, mountains like shikara riding. All.
What's strange about the whole place, I do say it would be an excellent honeymoon destination. You've all like romantic things like the lake, the Dal Lake. It's very peaceful, as I said. But you do get the sense, because it's so militarised. It's the most militarised place in the world per capita. Like, if you compare it to Afghanistan or even Ukraine, the proportion of soldiers to civilians, it's not even close. Kashmir is overwhelmingly the most militarised area in the world. So you do kind of get a sense that the place is occupied, even though I said you do feel safe, weirdly, because of that. Like, it doesn't feel lawless or anything, which apparently back in the 90s it kind of did. But at the same time, you do get a sense of occupation, that the place is occupied by these soldiers, and they don't seem to have a particular relationship with the local people, so it is a weird kind of atmosphere, even though it's like a contradiction. It's peaceful, but it's not. There's also quite unique things, like there's a shrine that's believed by Ahmadi Muslims to be the tomb of Jesus Christ in Kashmir. So there's all these like random sites like that, which, yeah, again, if they're anywhere in the world, would probably be covered in tourists, but in Kashmir it's not. I left Srinagar for Sonamarg for my first Kashmiri road trip up into the mountains. So I was sad to leave the beautiful houseboats, but I was short on time, unfortunately.
So honey, today it will be a good day.
It was even a very interesting experience, just travelling along the road, seeing the different sites along the road. We actually saw pretty bad car accident. It was a truck had flipped over. It appears it maybe was overtaken or something, and then it went down a bank, completely flipped over. There was all the goods had fallen out the side of the road. We slowed down, fearing the worst, to see if they were okay, but the guy got out and seemed to be completely fine, which is a miracle considering no one wears seatbelts there, but it's all luck, I suppose. But yeah, the sights along the road were very interesting. There's even the road safety messages I thought were quite amusing, quite creative, that you saw along the road. But I think that after seeing the crash and seeing the way people drive, I think the road safety signs were largely ignored. There's even one stage where we're coming along the road, and very twisty mountain road. We could just see a truck coming the other side of the road, and the car in front of us was trying to overtake two trucks on the inside on a bend when there's another truck coming. So that just sums it up. You'd literally see like cars weaving in and out, and then another truck coming last minute, it just weave back in. Well, it's a miracle how there's not so much more crashes. But the further into the mountains we got, the more beautiful the scenery was. Absolutely amazing. I've never seen anything like it. Not in the Alps, not anywhere. And yeah, it's such a shame that not many people, particularly from the west, will ever get to see it. So when we reached Sonamarg, there's kind of at the end, there's like a trail where you can see more beautiful views up in the mountains. So the guy that owned the houseboat I stayed in, he told me, he goes, there's no need to go up on a donkey or a horse because they charge you. They say, we'll bring you up in a donkey or a horse. He says you can walk up, but he says just make sure you rent some boots. So I get there and they're like to me, they're like, oh no, you can't get up without a horse. And I was like, no, I don't want to get a horse, so I'll give it a go. I don't know, no, you can't get it. But then how they got me, because I kept saying, no, I'll go up, is they're like, well, you can't rent the boots without going on the horse. So this poor horse, I ended up having to sit up on it. It was only like a pony, so I think it was far too big. But I wasn't enjoying it. Like, we're going up, it wasn't muddy, but I wasn't really enjoying it because I couldn't like stop and take pictures, take it all in. I felt a bit restricted. So I got halfway up and I started negotiating with the bloke and I was like, I'll pay you half, we're not even halfway there. And he kept trying to convince me to go the full way. And I'm thinking, like, it's a good deal. You're getting paid more than if you brought me the full way. So eventually, yeah, we came to a deal because we weren't even halfway there, like, so it would have been worth his while. And like, because I was on the horse, I didn't get any pictures or videos, but literally like in the middle of the Himalayas, in the middle of the mountains, and there's like fighter jets flying around and big like Soviet army helicopters because India was non-aligned during the Cold War.
The task of my squadron was to move to valley to further strengthen the air defense cover and also to keep Pakistani Air Force at bay.
So they got equipment from the West and from the Soviet Union, so a lot of the Indian Army helicopters, still like the big Soviet Army helicopters, they're flying around the valley, fighter jets doing manoeuvres. Yet again, such a peaceful mountain area and there's just a fighter jet flying around. It's like, where else would you see it? Well, I ended up looking pretty much like a liquidator from Chernobyl. I was wearing the boots and I was wearing the clothes I bought in Varanasi, so I looked ridiculous, but it was funny. And literally all the guys on the horses, they're telling me that I was going to fall and ruin all my clothes and way back down because it's so muddy without a horse. Like, they're all literally laughing at me when I left. So when I went back down, I was very careful not to fall. I nearly did because it was slippy, but I strolled back and gave back the boots. No mud on me so I didn't fall, so I was quite proud of that. When I got to the end of the trail, they're serving some lovely Maggi noodles, so sat there, had a moment, eat my Maggi noodles. It's funny because anyone that's been to India from the West will say, particularly girls, that everywhere you go, people ask you to get photos. It's really weird. You feel like a celebrity. When we were there, it's funny because all these people kept just asking me for photos because it's like the only Westerner there, because everyone there is from India. So these fellas from West Bengal, this other family, and it was funny because they were from West Bengal as well. They were speaking Bengali and the daughter spoke good English, and she was saying, "Oh, my father thinks you're trying to speak Hindi." I'm like, "No, speaking English," because they spoke Bengali. So funny things like that. But yeah, I made it back down. A few hours because obviously time constraints. I don't think you need much more time. It's kind of just a trail up, beautiful scenery and stuff. I think if I was to go back again, I'd try some of the other touristy sites, like maybe Pahalgam, and I think there's another one as well. I'd like to spend more time in Srinagar, exploring the city and the Dal Lake, because I literally only got brought around on the lake and got a bit of like the city life on my first night there, so would like to certainly explore Srinagar more. Well, yeah, again, strange up there because you've Indian flags everywhere. The next town, as far as I know, from Sonamarg, I still think it's another hour or two, is Kargil, which was obviously where the Kargil War was in 1999 between India and Pakistan, which was the first war between two nuclear powers, even though it was a non-nuclear war, so obviously the international community is quite concerned about that. The fourth war was the Kargil War in 1999. This was significant as in the late 90s, both Pakistan and India had gotten nuclear bombs and become nuclear powers. So this was the first war between two nuclear powers, and obviously there was a risk that this could escalate into an all-out nuclear war, so it was particularly concerning for the international community. So basically Pakistan had secretly crossed the line of control and taken some high-altitude Indian army positions in Indian-held Kashmir. India fought back in high altitude warfare near Kargil.
Minutes, huge streaks of orange across the skyline. What you see behind you are multi-barrel rocket launchers. They're going to target directly on top of Tiger Hills, and the role they play is to saturate the targets on top of Tiger Hills by dumping a very large amount of explosives onto the targets in a very short duration of time.
India retook the positions and Pakistan withdrew under international pressure because, as mentioned, the international community was very concerned about potential escalation. This demonstrated that even with the involvement of two nuclear powers, that Kashmir still had the potential to cause war and was particularly concerning for the international community. In 2019, the Indian government revoked Article 370, which gave Kashmir some sort of autonomy and made it different to regular Indian states. This revoked its special status and attempted to integrate Kashmir into the rest of India. Now, obviously, with India introducing more troops, this led to an increase in tourism in particular, allowing me to visit. However, this also took away Kashmir's right to self-determination and increased repression and alienation of the Kashmiri population. For example, in 2023, when I visited, there was 28,000 foreign tourists. This went up to 46,000 in 2024. In 2018, there was 850,000 tourists, mainly from India. This went up to 2.99 million in 2024, so a significant increase there. Now, since the Pahalgam terrorist attack last year, this has gone down again. way back was a bit crazy because by now I was quite tired. I'd been woken up early by the call to prayer. Didn't get a proper sleep on any of the night buses, so only got a few hours, even though the houseboat was very cozy, heated blankets. So I fell asleep in the Jeep on the way back, and next thing the driver like wakes me up in a panic because there's checkpoints every few kilometers, army checkpoints, police checkpoints, and he wakes me up in a panic because obviously you had the Western tourists that were kidnapped in the 1990s. I'm there passed out in the back of the Jeep and he's coming up to a checkpoint, so like I wake up in a daze and literally there's a lot of soldiers like with their rifles aimed at the car, and they're coming over like shouting at us. That the guy nearest to me, that he seemed to be like the officer or whatever, because he seemed to be like telling everyone what to do. He just like puts the thumbs up and I just go like, yeah, and then he's like, they all put down the rifles, like, yeah, go through. And I was like, sometimes you forget you're in a conflict zone, you know, and I was just like, to drive me out, I'll make sure not to fall asleep again, because it obviously looks dodgy going through checkpoints, passed out Westerner in the back of the car. So yeah, that was a bit crazy, a bit surreal. Now, even though the Kashmiri independence movement is said to be secular-led, some of the Islamist groups involved in the Kashmir insurgency had links to Al-Qaeda and also helped commit the 2008 Mumbai terror attacks. Now, for Western governments, India has been famously non-aligned. So in the 1970s, they weren't aligned with the US, or they weren't aligned with the Soviet Union. You also have Pakistan as a major security partner of the US, and then India is also seen as an ally. So this causes difficulties for the international community. This resulted in the 1990s on attacks on Western tourists. These attacks weren't random. They specifically attempted to internationalize the conflict and were mainly committed by Islamist groups. This would force Western governments not only to get involved, but also punish Western governments for supporting India. Probably the most well-known attack was the 1995 kidnapping of Western tourists. One British tourist escaped, and the rest of the group, a number of others, they disappeared and are assumed to have been murdered. This shocked the international community, obviously severely impacted tourism, and all of a sudden brought Kashmir once again to global attention. Got back, the driver brought me straight to the airport. And yeah, once we got to the airport, that was crazy. I think it was 6 checkpoints to get into the airport. So like in Delhi, for example, you have security to get into the airport as well, but it's literally just like, they look at your passport, you go through a scanner, you're in, and then you do the normal security to get to the boarding gates. Kashmir, it's checkpoint after checkpoint. So first one, they ask who we are, why at the airport. So they check the driver's ID, they check my passport. Then they have the mirrors looking under the car to make sure there's no car bombs under the car. They literally stripped out the whole car, so they open the glove box up, lift and see everything to make sure there's no car bombs in the car. Next checkpoint, they wave like us out of the car, they wave the driver. They have the driver up against the wall, they're patting him down and like searching him, and then they're like to me, they're like, come on, come with us. I'm like, is the driver getting taken away? Am I getting taken away? What the fuck is going on? And then it turned out it was just because I had a backpack that I had to go put the backpack through a scanner. But they didn't pat me down, but they did pat the driver down. So I don't know if that's just because he was Kashmiri. But they literally took me off, scanned my backpack, and they were like, yeah, go through another checkpoint. Like, I think we had our documents checked like 3 times. Then, yeah, again, have to prove your flight, where you're flying. I was quite early, so I tried to get my flight changed. They said it might be possible to go on the early flight. I was just sitting around, as shittiest airports I've ever been. There's no facilities like something from the 1980s. I ended up getting some like pot noodle because the food there was vile. pictures, like the chips looked like they'd been sitting there like a week, and it was expensive as well by like standards for Kashmir. Yeah, that was my Kashmir experience. So to summarise, Kashmir is the basis for most of the conflict between India and Pakistan since the foundation of the states of India and Pakistan. There's also the international element. We have two nuclear powers disputing this region. Kashmir itself doesn't necessarily want to be part of India or Pakistan, but would favour independence, so that gives another perspective. I was certainly intrigued to visit Kashmir. It's one of the most beautiful places I ever visited. The risk of terrorism, I think, these days is quite low, but that isn't to say obviously the Pahalgam terrorist attack was quite recent, so it still does occur. But then again, you have terrorist attacks in most major European cities these days at the same frequency. As I'd always recommend, do your own research. I determined it was safe. Would I go back? Yes, 100% I would. I do wish I stayed longer because it was an amazing place. I wouldn't think it's any more dangerous. I wouldn't go to somewhere that I genuinely thought was properly dangerous. The biggest risk there is probably being in a car accident, but it was unique, and I think I went at a unique point in time because it wasn't that touristy. I think particularly if there's no major conflict, that I think it will become quite touristy, but certainly a very unique part of the world, a unique place to visit. And anyone, once you've done your research and weighed up the risks, use your head. But otherwise, yeah, I think it's a very cool place to visit.
Somebody just got us a